It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. Why do I always say that twice? I don't know. It's an old radio habit, right? When you do radio, they teach you to repeat things over and over and over again, so it sticks. You know, like the phone numbers, you just say it over and over and over again. Old habit. I just caught myself. But instant derail this Wellness Wednesday. But what we are talking about today is something that is, it has multiple terms, and I've talked about overwhelm before. This is a particular kind of overwhelm called compassion fatigue. Now, we have talked about building resilience, we have talked about building self-compassion, so on and so forth, but I'm talking about compassion fatigue this week because compassion fatigue is also known as empath overwhelm, or empath shutdown, or so on and so forth. And because of stuff going on in, my life right now, this has been a topic of conversation in the circles I'm in. And I thought, hey, if we're talking about this, maybe this would be useful to someone else. Compassion fatigue happens to people who either have a naturally high degree of empathy, and so people tend to tell them their problems, or people who work in mental health services. And so, basically you're dealing with a lot of other people's stuff. Sometimes that sticks to you. And this stuff is no joke. It's something that people should take extremely seriously. If you're just feeling run down or ragged, I call it spiky, being around other people, that could be compassion fatigue. But serious compassion fatigue, they actually have something called a secondary traumatic stress scale for, people who work with, in the mental health fields and things like that. And it's symptoms like, I feel emotionally numb. My heart starts pounding when I think about, interacting with this particular person. It seemed like I was reliving what the other person was going through, trouble sleeping, feeling discouraged about the future, reminders. It's all sort of traumatic stuff, but like not about stuff that directly happened to you. Now, this is something that gets mocked a lot in the general public, the fact that somebody could feel jumpy or have disturbing dreams based on just hearing about an event from another person. While some, we'll say, parasitic personalities do exploit this stuff and learn to mimic some of this stuff, as part of really, really unhealthy behaviors. This is real for a lot of people. Over the weekend, I had to go to a very sad event. I won't get into any details because I haven't asked the people involved whether I can talk about it, but it was basically, I was there, not just out of respect for the family, but I was there to watch a friend of mine who was concerned about overload and, compassion fatigue and all that stuff. And it can really sneak up on someone, especially, people with high degree of empathy, people with PTSD, all that stuff. And we talk about like autism overload. We talk about introvert overload. And we talk about, compassion fatigue or empath overload. And I think a lot of people think they're the same thing. And is there a ton of overlap? Hell yeah. If you have any one of these things, you can relate to the others, but they don't come from the same root. And I'm going to take a pause here because I realized I forgot to do the Patreon thing. So help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. Okay, get that out of the way. You can be an introvert and not be empathic. You can be a person with a high degree of empathy and not be an introvert. There are some people who experience compassion fatigue or empathy overload who are extroverts who normally feed off other people, but certain situations just get exhausting. Certain things do drain you. And, we hear these things tossed around pop culture like, emotional vampirism and stuff like that. Some people are just toxic people, but sometimes it's got nothing to do with the person. It's just a really difficult situation and you're getting worn out. And because I hear this a lot from people I know on the spectrum, people with autism have empathy. Once a person with autism understands what's going on, they can care a lot. So don't act like those two things are mutually exclusive, right? Like somebody can have a very high degree of empathy once they know what's going on and find what's happening to another person very overwhelming. So what's the difference? The difference between sympathy, oh, that's terrible, and empathy is you hurting hurts me, right? You're actually taking on the stuff that the other person is feeling, right? It's not the same as I can relate to this situation. It's actually feeding off the emotions of other people. It can be a very useful tool. It can be really frigging exhausting. There's going to be a lot of this, well, for the time, at least up here, where people are getting back out and being around more people, just merely sensing all the stuff that's going on with other people in your physical presence can be tiring. Personally, I sometimes find just absorbing other people's stuff through the internet can be a lot. Everything's been very emotional of late. And it happens every damn summer, right? But I find just the sheer amount of pain and the sheer amount of fear and the sheer amount of frustration, even in internet comments, I find myself just, aching for certain people. And it can really wear you out and give you this feeling, like I said, spiky, this sort of frayed nerves feeling. And that's very real. And that is not something you can push through. If you try to push through it, it might actually hinder the more positive elements of having a lot of empathy. And you'll find yourself really, really staticky in any sort of crowd. You'll find your emotions all over the place. You'll find yourself snapping at people. The weirdest one is, I get this high sensitivity to sounds, high sensitivity to smells. Unfortunately, after I went to this, very sad event, a smoke detector somewhere in my house started beeping. That battery needs changing beeping. We couldn't find it for 3 days because it was in the basement. It was none of the ones that were hung up. It was one we took down and I guess forgot about. But yeah, 3 days of this beep, beep, drove me fucking nuts. And I admit, when I found the fucking smoke detector, instead of just calmly taking out the battery, I pried it apart and ripped the wires apart. It was just a smoke detector. No one was harmed. But the other thing about being overloaded, being fatigued in this way, is that conflict becomes increasingly difficult to handle, to cope with. Most people do not like conflict. Some people have serious, serious, serious dread of conflict. It may surprise you to know that I am profoundly conflict averse because of a high degree of empathy, I can't be mad at people for very long because, if somebody's hurt, if somebody's sad, I feel that. So it's very hard to stay angry. Again, on the other hand, if I'm around someone who's like out of control angry, I have trouble not picking that up. And obviously that's bad because obviously that can cause things to spiral out of control very rapidly. However, through a lot of work, I've gotten a lot better at conflict, but I have limits. And I really think that in a lot of pockets of the internet, a lot of groups, this fatigue, this overload has set in. And it's this cycle of people have a lot of empathy, feel like they don't fit in because you often feel like you're not normal. But also, there's a conflict aversion, there's a wear out, and it just seems like people are in this hypersensitive state, and that's not a criticism, just like heightened, just like I said, spiky. And they're not recharging. It goes from one fight to another, to another, to another, and it's just this constant state of hypervigilance and jumpiness, and there's no perspective anymore. And I have been really struggling to find an explanation for this that is not, these are just not nice, crazy people, right? Excuse the ableist language. Like I said, I've been trying to find a conclusion that's not that. And I'm wondering if this is what it is. A lot of people in nerd spaces, especially in, gaming, where creativity sort of meets tech, they are very sensitive people. I think a lot of people in these spaces are very sensitive, and were shamed for being sensitive. And so they isolated and computers don't give you the same feedback loop that a person does. It's much easier to set boundaries and self-regulate when you're working with a computer or you're working through a computer, right? You can take a breath before you respond to a comment or a direct message or something like that, or a tweet. More people should take a pause before responding to a tweet. But then you get into these groups, these message boards, these Facebook groups, these Telegram chats, so on and so forth. And everyone's emotion and all the build and everything like that, it starts to become contagious. And people end up losing it over very little. And I mean, we had a lot of serious talks last week about why that's a problem. Because especially in media, the entertainment media is this really unfortunate combination of highly empathic, highly emotional, highly creative, sensitive people and fucking sociopaths. And the sociopaths tend to devour the highly empathic people because that's what sociopaths do to people with real feelings. Apologies to the sociopaths out there. I know you can't help it. You can be aware of it. But it makes the machinations of the entertainment industry very, very hard to understand for people who haven't gotten the ick on them. And it seems like, how could this possibly function? Well, it functions by churning through highly empathic, creative people so the sociopaths can make money. This sounds very dreary. It is just true. And unfortunately, I think that codependency has jumped to the internet where it's sort of metastasized, where we see that replication of, a relative few sociopaths really poisoning some online communities and everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off and everything like that, and doing things that seem very, very strange and a lot to the outside world. And it's very hard to keep in mind that these are good people. Does this excuse continuing to go back to those drama wells and continuing to push yourself into compassion fatigue, into empathy overload? No, it doesn't. There are techniques that you can use to stop that, or at least lessen the overwhelm, the hypervigilance, the jumpiness. And they involve shifts in perspective. And I may need to do this over the next few weeks because every type of perspective shift is very different. But the basics is putting yourself in another person's place, using that empathy that you're being overwhelmed by to get some distance to the things you're feeling. It's exercises like, if somebody's just heartbroken about something and you're feeling that ache for them. This is hard and this is going to sound really weird, but you can start thinking, what are the other feelings that they, might be experiencing right now? What do they need right now? What can I do that's active and productive instead of just feeling bad? Being productive, being useful is very helpful. Don't force yourself on them. Because what you may feel as just a deep sadness, another person could be incredibly frustrated by or angry by, or, they deflect and repurpose emotions to make them easier to deal with in a way you might not. And that can be very confusing when someone, you're trying to support suddenly lashes out at you. But by framing it from another point of view, it can help you diffuse the actual body stress response you're experiencing from taking on these bad feelings. It's also, if you want to help someone, they've actually found that small gestures, are you okay? How are you doing? So on and so forth. Little human connection actually means more to people than big grand gestures like, a big fundraising drive or the thing in the movie, let's get the whole neighborhood together to help this person. Sometimes that can be overwhelming for someone. But sometimes all you can really do, and I talk about self-compassion a lot, but all you can really do is basically say, it's okay to not feel okay, and practice that personal acceptance regardless if we succeed or fail. Okay, you snapped at somebody because you were jittery. So what? You're human, right? Learn to back off faster next time. Move on, right? Great. You can't do everything. You can do some things. And often the smaller things are more effective than the large things. And that's what I keep hearing from people with all the really tumultuous stuff that's been going on of late that is really overwhelming people, especially with some of the stuff coming out of Blizzard Activision and some of the other more disturbing and disgusting stories that have come out of the internet land of late. People are like, I wish there was something I could do. I feel like helpless. I can't do anything. What do I do? The small things matter, right? You can't stamp out systemized evil like what was going on at Activision and other major game companies. You can ask someone privately, and in a time where you actually have the opportunity and wherewithal to listen, you can ask somebody, are you okay? This must be hard for you. In your shoes, I would be feeling pretty something right now. You can do that. And that is something. And people really undervalue what, we in certain communities called sit rep Saturdays, just check-ins. How you doing? You know, because a lot of the time people don't want you solving their problems for them anyway. I know. I'm sorry, engineers. Some people don't want you to solve every problem. But yeah, it's always better to ask someone what they need than to guess. Because again, you're coming at that, even if you're feeling the same feelings as someone, you may not process those feelings the same way, and you may not need the same things in response to those feelings. And getting that wrong can make your spikiness brush up against their spikiness, and then you've got a freaking emotional kaiju fight going on, right? And that's what I'm seeing online. I'm seeing a lot of people just spikes everywhere. And I'm like, what the hell? And there's so much static, and there's so much noise, and there's so much rage, and there's so much stuff that doesn't make any sense because it is just overload. And collectively, society handles it all wrong. Part of that because sociopathic marketing companies exploit it for easy PR. But that's not our problem. Like I said, you can't stop that evil. You can lessen the impacts of that kind of thing and get smarter about responding to it, more self-compassion about responding to it, feeling what you feel, validating that feeling. And that's the step I think a lot of people miss. I'm making a big guess here, but that validation of feeling is what seems to be missing. Because if you're validating your own feelings, like, wow, that was really disappointing, you don't need to run around screaming and argue with random people on the internet to validate your position. You're already validated. So you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on that. What I want to know from you guys is what angle this came at you at, how this sat with you, and what tools you will find most useful to deal with this stuff. Because I can tailor content that way for the next little bit based on that. Because, like I said, I might be right in the diagnosis here, but the treatment is really going to vary. So let me know. Let me know what other people can do for you here. What you can do for me is help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Sometimes the best segues are the most craven. Thanks for watching.